This is a speaker meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to present speakers who have a powerful message of depth and weight and a complete understanding of 12-step recovery. We forego the traditional readings to allow more time for the speaker to share. Please help me welcome our speaker, Joe.
Hi, my name's Joe. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Joe.
I feel comfortable in CMA. I can say that without getting crucified or tarred and feathered, or any of the above. I talked to Jay about what we were going to do here. We're getting ready to go do a workshop in one of the institutions down in Tucson in a month, and one of the things we're going to try and do is get them through the steps in a day, at least roughly, get an explanation of how the steps are found, the original 12-step recovery process described by the authors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And so a lot of people over the years have not been shown how to find their experience in the book. So that's what we do on Thursday night, and that's what we're going to go do down for the people. We call them prospects before they become alumni, if they've been incarcerated. And then we try and help those alumni live successfully, but we like to meet them inside. If we can't free them inside, they'll never live free outside. Make sense? So the same thing with any of us in any kind of institution. If someone doesn't come in and introduce us to freedom in here, we're not going to have much of a chance out there. So what we thought we'd do is just take a look at the first 3 steps and walk through it maybe in a way that you've never had anyone walk you through it. How many of you have been to an AA meeting before? Anybody here? Okay, good. A good percentage of you. So on most AA meetings I've ever been to, they read a portion of Chapter 5 entitled How It Works. And that is really the wrap-up of Step 1 and Step 2, leading us to a 3rd step decision and then the explanation of the 3rd step decision. So to take all the mystery out of it. Because I cannot possibly move into a conscious relationship with something without a conscious decision being made. In other words, I have to understand it, at least intellectually, to make a conscious decision. So it should be easily understandable what I'm entering into. So we're going to see if we can take some of the mystery out of the process. One of the things I've learned a lot of years around AA recovery, CMA recovery, HA recovery, is if we don't get the first 2 to 3 steps, we're not going to get any of the rest of it. If you don't encounter tangible power in Step 2, you're never going to seek to improve consciousness of a concept, because nobody is. We seek to improve consciousness, which is the awareness of being aware of experiences. So I'm not only aware I'm having this experience, but I'm aware that I'm aware. Although this is happening in me and through me, it's not happening of me. Does that make sense? And that's the authors go to great lengths to do that. So let's start in How It Works. And it says, very first sentence gives us a promise and a condition. It says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Did you catch the promise? What was the promise? Rarely have we seen a person fail. And what was the condition?
Follow the path.
Thoroughly followed our path. Did you notice they did not say paths? I wonder if they misspoke. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. Have you ever contemplated, how many of you have had some struggles, been in and out of fellowships of recovery? Me too. Okay. Did you ever contemplate in any of that time whether you were a cannot or a will not? How many of you thought you were a will not till you found out you were a cannot? Yeah, so this is an end to condemnation. Let's not worry about cannot or will not. Let's see if we can't get access to power that empowers my walk. Fair enough? And then it says that the ones that do not recover are people that are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So it would be good to find out about what? Constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about what? You ever thought about that? Because a lot of people just say everything. No, they know I'm insane when I first get here. I'm not capable of being honest about much of anything. So they've given me 2 specific things that they introduced me to by this point. Should we go back and review? Any of you going through a book doing steps now? Okay, so you've had a first step experience. Did you look at the doctor's opinion? The doctor's opinion talks about on page XXVIII, Roman numeral 28. The bottom of the page, it says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. How many of you can relate to liking the effect produced by methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin? How many of you are sober in here right now? Can you, sitting there sober, bring to consciousness right now that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by getting a hit? That's a little spooky, isn't it? So, I'm sitting here sober, but I can still bring to consciousness that ease and comfort that comes at once, yes? Okay, and then it says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. Any of you ever were pretty sure you were an addict, checked into some place, yeah, I'm an addict, and then somewhere along the way you thought, I may have overreacted. See what they're talking about? Because most of us have experience with that. Okay? And then it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks they see others taking with impunity. Have you had that experience? You go to work, had a hard day, everyone says we had a hard day, we're going to go have a couple drinks. And you're thinking, I had a hard day. Why can't I have a couple drinks? Any of you ever try that one? Did you find out, like me, that the reason I can't go have a few drinks because I had a hard day is they all went home and I went and lived under a bush? Any of you had a similar experience? Okay. So my reaction is very different to theirs, but I can bring to consciousness right now that sense of ease and comfort. So that's the one thing I need to be honest with myself about, right? And then they introduced us to tangible power in a step 2 experience. You ever notice step 2 on the wall does not say God? Do you think that was a mistake? Do you think they were trying to trick us? No. They knew that we were prejudiced. They knew we were show me, don't tell me kind of people. And they said, we do not expect you to believe in anything you cannot experience the effects of. How many of you have done a second step experience through the book? Did you notice how they talked about electrical theory, and all of us believe in electrical theory even though we can't fully explain it or comprehend it? And we say that we all believe in electrical theory. Why? Because we've experienced its effects. You flip on the lights come on, we've been shocked, whatever, we've experienced its effects. And so we know logical minds are not going to latch on to anything less than tangible power. So no one asks you to come to believe in this power we call God without us first giving you a tangible demonstration of that power. How many of you guys come from a Christian persuasion? Okay, then you know that what we need to introduce anybody to, if that is our persuasion, is we have to tap into that encounter with the power of God if we're to live free. Yes? And that's why the step says what it says, contrary to any popular debate. Okay, or not so popular debate. The lucky thing about being up here is there's no debate. And if you want to argue with these guys, they're all dead. So, anyway, some of us were on our way there, right? Okay, so we're back to take a look at the other thing we got to be honest about. It says that on page 50 of the book, they talk about the people that came to AA and the people they witnessed. So the book was written by the first 100 who recovered, and they wrote the book about the first several thousand who recovered. So that the first 100 were 3 or 4 years sober, and the several thousand were the ones they worked with along the way. Make sense? And so it says here, are thousands of men and women worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they've come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. How many of you would have to admit that some kind of a revolutionary change was necessary if we were to live free? Because none of us get to this kind of a setting on a winning streak, right? Typically not. Okay. So it says, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Does that sound conceptual to you? Hell no, it sounds like experiential, right? So half of them were atheists or agnostics declared. But they found if they just did the steps, this power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Some of you are feeling that. Who's feeling that as I talk to you? That's the power we call God. It's flowing within you. It's not coming from up here. Deep down inside, every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And then they tell you in the last analysis, so for you guys that are more religious, the fundamental idea of God is the purpose for which you were created, which apparently included salvation of people who suffered from addiction, because you're now uniquely qualified for that. And then right behind the purpose, the idea, the fundamental idea, is the power to carry that out, which is what I'm going to need to enact the third step decision moving forward. Does that make sense? Okay. So then it goes on to say this happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. So what are these simple requirements? Trust God. Now I've been introduced to power, not a theology. Clean house. Work with others. Not too tough, is it? Okay. So then I'm going to go from there. Those two things I've got to be honest about. Was I introduced to power, and am I having a bit of a sketchy time without power? A little restless. Okay. So then it says, there are such unfortunates, they're not at fault, they seem to have been born that way. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. The manner of living is described in detail. Don't think the manner of living has anything to do with going to meetings. That's a benefit of being recovered in the fellowship. You can go to the fellowship and you can celebrate with others that recovery. But the meetings are not the program. They're the fellowship. And we've confused people about that over the years, and people think AA doesn't work or CMA doesn't work because they went and sat in rooms and got high anyway. And I sure as hell did, because I didn't know the difference. So I don't want anyone else to have that experience that wants to know. Make sense? Okay. So it says their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. How many of you have been in our rooms and have seen those guys with grave emotional and mental disorders? How many of you have been here long enough to know it's you? And if you don't believe me, go down to the public detox sometime and see if there aren't a whole lot of people there you don't want to be like. Any of you ever have to sober up in a public detox? You notice there are a lot of people there we don't want to be like? Did they point out to you, like me, that I was there as a patient and not an observer? No one else ever had that experience? Okay, so it says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, what we are like now. If you've decided you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. So we don't talk to people straight enough. If I want to know what they had, I can't go ask somebody in a modern room. I got to go see what it is they had so I can make a conscious decision if I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it, or if I'm even willing to go to certain lengths to get it. Does that make sense? So let's go take a look. Go to page, where am I at, guys? 25? You guys that have been to a study or two? So you go to page 25 to see what they had, so you can decide if in fact you'd like to have what they had. Page 25, the middle of the page, it says the great fact is just this and nothing less. That we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. Didn't we all just agree we needed such a revolution? Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. Okay. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered in our heart and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. Now that may sound like nothing, but how many of you can remember the tremendous suffering you experienced in addiction, active addiction? And you just begged for anything to take this away. And then somehow you ended up in a place and people lay this spiritual toolkit at your feet and you start to grow into it. And whether you were atheist or agnostic, half these guys were atheist or agnostic. They believed God did not exist or could not be proven to exist. Declared. And yet, they're now declaring, every one of them, that God is no concept. God dwells in me and lives through me. That's quite a testimony, isn't it? And remember, these are drunks. They're like any of us. Okay. So then it goes on to say that he has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. How many of you came in and you didn't do the steps, or you didn't do a complete inventory, or you didn't do some portion of it, but when you really encountered the power, you had a new willingness and you started moving through it? Did that power not enable you to accomplish things that you had never been able to do before? Was it a tangible power that did it for you? Some of you are feeling that tangible power now. Are you still? Who's feeling the tangible power now as we talk about it? So as you give credit to the power, you're going to get more power. That also has a biblical ring to it. But it's a fact in our rooms. Does it make sense if we teach it right? Okay. So then it says, if you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. I'm going to assume you're as seriously alcoholic as I was. So I'm not going to talk to you about any middle of the road solutions. The one path that they talk about is the solution in me. The process is the process that reveals that solution, that power to me, through me. Does that make sense? Okay. Alright, so our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Notice how it says what we were like, not what it was like. What it was like was my insanity. That was a perspective. What they want me to do in my fourth step is start writing down what I was like, what kind of calamities, pomps, and worships were obscuring my consciousness of my identity in this power, and then what I'd like to be going forward. So then I describe what I'm like now, because I at least have an idea for who I'd like to be, and it's better than the guy I was yesterday. Anyone else? How many of you fall short from time to time? Remember, our program is meant to be suggestive only. Right? But at least I'm aware. And then once I become aware that I'm aware, sometimes I can stop it in the thought life. How many of you have discovered as a result of this, or maybe not even all of it, but you have the power to be kinder than you feel like being? What is that but a power greater than you operating through you? That doesn't take a religious mind to figure that out, because I used to go off when people misbehave. Or if I perceive they misbehave. Anyone want to drive on? And now I can not go off sometimes. Okay, so then they go on to talk to us that some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way. But we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Why is that, you think? Where is the main problem of the addict? Centers in the mind. Where do my old ideas come from? My mind. It's an old idea factory. How many of you have done this long enough that you learned that you didn't even know what your old ideas were until you confronted them? Yeah, lack of power is our dilemma. Knowledge is part of that power that we lack. Yes? Okay. So remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it's too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is? God. They've never said any of our names, have they? But what do we believe? How many of you today thought someone else caused how you were thinking or feeling? All of us, right? If we're honest. See, that can't be so if God's got all the power. So all that's happening is to benefit all of us. The world is reflecting how we're thinking and feeling so we can get in discipline. It's not causing how we're thinking and feeling. But that's not conceptual. It's got to be experiential. And you won't know that until you enter the process and start working with others. Does that make sense? Okay. Then it says, may you find him now. Now, where did they tell us to go looking? They said they had to go deep down inside. And how did they search? Fearlessly, which means if I'm going to search fearlessly in the place I'm most afraid to go, I'm going to need a power greater than me to overcome that fear. How many of you have said a third step and then went out and got high again? Just recited it out of the book, or when someone said, say the prayer. There's no power in a prayer that you don't believe in. So the fact of the matter is, if you don't care about the prayer, God doesn't care about the prayer. Where does God dwell? So if you're not ready, you're only fooling you, right? And if you don't know what the prayer is intending, how the hell would I be consciously moving into it? Does that make sense? Okay. So half measures availed us nothing. So they knew all of that, and then they learned another thing. How many of you have been at this long enough that you've concluded that half measures seem at times to avail us at least half? That's the guy you said that's sitting there miserable at every meeting, but says, at least I'm sober. You're like, dude, let me go out in the car and get you a little bump, because you're not much fun to be around. We stood at the turning point. We asked His protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which is suggested as a program of recovery. So the program of recovery is the steps. It's not the fellowship, which doesn't require anything. They say the only requirement is the desire to stop drinking, but I've been in rooms for over 30 years that have never met an arbiter of desire at the door. Therefore, there are no requirements. We just pretend. Right? How many of you sat in an AA meeting or whatever AA meeting and lit up, been high, drunk? Yeah, there's no requirements, right? I wasn't showing much desire with my thirst buster full of gin and I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you, if you want to get well, it's the program, not the fellowship. And not because you have to, but because if you're like me, you either get to God or you get to God. You know? Okay, so they go read through the steps. I won't do that. But then it says, many of us exclaimed with an order, I can't go through with it. How many of you have had that sentence? Do not let the step you see on the wall stop you from taking the step you're in. Because all that is fear getting in the way of you becoming a better version of yourself. And when you get there, you'll be prepared for the next step. And if you can't do anything else, then talk to somebody with your honest doubt and prejudice, and we'll help you encounter the power. If you ask sincerely for an encounter with the power by any of us known by that power, we will introduce you to the power. And it won't be our decision, it's just what will happen. Okay, so then it says, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic. So when they say that we were alcoholic, what they are saying is present tense were, not past tense were. But when we witness as alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous, I witness to a condition I've been recovered from, not a present condition. So a lot of times people get confused by that. If you look biblically, Matthew witnesses as an apostle of Christ and a tax collector. Why would he do that? To show the miracle of his redemption in a time when the tax collector was the most hated person in society. And we do the same thing in Alcoholics Anonymous, because those of us who are crystal meth addicts, heroin addicts, and alcoholics are often the most hated people in society. And so the miracle that I can be here giving of myself to you instead of out there in a dope house somewhere is being demonstrated by works. Does that make sense? Because works are observable by others, so they can see the effects. Fair enough? Okay, and then we could not manage our own lives. Did anyone ever show you what the unmanageability of our life was that we copped to and won? Because a lot of times we cop to it and no one ever shows it to us. If you go to page 52, I believe it is, they'll tell you about what the unmanageability is and see if you relate to that. 52, the middle of the page, it said we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. How many of you had that little discovery? How many of you sobered up and still had them? How many of you decided it was because people were pricks? And so you isolated away from all people and you still had a problem with personal relationships? Any of you ever really get isolated off by yourself and still angry as hell? So the main problem centers in the mind. We have a problem with personal relationships. Remember, the world is showing us how we're thinking and feeling. It's not causing it. So if I don't get into my identity and start getting power to discipline my thought life, I'm going to suffer. Any of you ever suffered in your thought life? How many of you suffered long enough that you just decided, I'm going to medicate it? I know it's not going to turn out well, but I am going to medicate it. That'd make you an addict. Right? That's the real deal. So we're going to need power greater than ourselves, and they've told us, they're bearing witness, they've encountered such a power. And then that power is disclosed more and more to them and through them as they went out to carry this message. Okay. So then it goes on to say we were having trouble with personal relationships, couldn't control our emotional natures, we were prey to misery and depression. Any of you had that happen? That we were full of fear, we were unhappy, couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Any of you had that experience? How many of you always kind of wanted to help people, but people didn't appreciate your offering of help? In AA, they teach us not to help them unless they ask, and not to do anything we're not willing to do. If you can't do it joyfully, don't do it. Right? I'm going to give you anytime you ask me, I'm going to give you respect, and I'm going to give you a sincere response, but I may not give you what you asked me for. I'm required to be true to me while showing you respect. Does that make sense? And I'll never offer you an opinion because I'm quite sure that I value it more than you do. They learned that. If you look at the 5, 6, and 7, we won't get there tonight, but they said we're people that spent thousands of dollars in doctors' opinions. Any of you go to psychiatric care or anything along? So we spent thousands of dollars. We didn't tell them the whole truth, nor did we follow their advice. So we as a class are people who have paid thousands of dollars for informed medical opinions, lied to get those opinions, and then ignored the results of those opinions. So to come into AA and start sharing our opinion with somebody, it's not helpful. So you can be grateful for being sober in AA because everyone else is still out there sharing opinions, and you know there's no value in that. Share your experience. Does it make sense? And then you can be of real help to other people. And you'll feel purpose. And when you feel purpose, that's power to live, man. Does it make sense? That everything I thought was a wasted life was preparing me for this moment. There's power in that. Yes? Okay. All right. So, probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. So have you guys tried enough methods to get your addiction relieved? And because, if we still look outside, we'll still look outside, right? Even when we sober up, we still look outside. Okay? And that God could and would if He were sought. It's really important that I come to believe that this power we call God will if He's sought. I'm going to have to seek that power to discipline my thought life, but I will be restored if I will. And the process will help me in the coming to believe. Does that make sense? So then it goes on to say, being convinced, we're at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Now, for years, people have said, a God of my understanding. That's not what they said. They told you precisely how Bill understood God when he wrote this. And when Bill told you about he was atheist or agnostic, and then he went to war, and he was in the graveyard, and he was scared, and he needed and wanted God, and God came. And then while he was there, he was reading this gravestone, and it was a soldier who had survived war and drank himself to death. So later, after Bill has had his meeting with Ebby, he says, the real significance of my time in the graveyard burst upon me. So what's the real significance? Well, he's a soldier who survived war. God came before war and He made it through war, but now he's a drunk, survived war, drinking himself to death. The power was with me then, the power's with me now. You ever had a spirit experience burst upon you and no one explained to you that was the experience of the Spirit? Because a lot of times religious people don't explain to those of us who have never been trained that this is sensory, this is tangible. And so we don't talk about it because we think everyone will think we're crazy. Like that mattered in addiction. But anyway. So the God He understood, He says very clearly, at long last, he saw the miracle of Ebby sitting in front of him. I felt all those revelations, and then I believed. So the God of His understanding was the subject of His experience, not the object of His belief. I believe in experiences. Does that make sense? And I'll tell you about my experiences. Matter of fact, it made me a fairly effective dope dealer to tell you about my experience. Okay, well, I wasn't as effective because I was also a consumer. But, okay, the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So, are you convinced? Based on what?
Experiences.
Okay, read the sentence again, because it's a higher standard. It says, any life. So I usually answer that question yes, because my experience shows that my life can hardly be a success. But if we want you to quit judging how you're thinking and feeling by the way you see people act or hear them speak. Because you'll never be free until you're free of it. Does that make sense? Until I'm free of me, I'm not free to be me. Everything's about me that you say until I'm free of me. And then I find out you probably don't think about me quite as often as I think about me. Just a thought. Okay. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. So how many of you have had good motives? And people still weren't happy. It says most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person's like the actor who wants to run the whole show, forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If only his arrangements would stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Notice how they said people and not addicts. This book, they agreed on every word. They say the words they mean the words they say, and it's self-defining. They'll define every word. We don't have to make it up. So when they talk about people, they're talking about all those people. When they want to talk about an alcoholic, now they're going to talk about me, perhaps you. But they will define it. Does that make sense? Okay. So it said everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. Does that sound like you? Come on, somebody tell me it sounds like you.
Yes.
Everybody's got good in them. Everybody's got not so good in them. We want you to find your human condition. Get to know who you really are. We want the authentic you, not some cloned version of you that someone told you you needed to be. We want you free. You're a gift to the world and to the rest of us, but only in your authentic state. We'll help you grow into a better version of you as we walk along shoulder to shoulder. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. So on the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. So not only do I have those traits, but every other human has those traits. So I'm going to have to get free of my idea that it's all personal, or I'm never ever going to be free. Does that make sense? Any of you ever suffer in your thought life? Okay. So what usually happens? Show doesn't come off very well. Sometimes we end up in a frickin' meeting at the Salvation Army on a Monday. You never know. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. And still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he's sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Have you ever looked in your inventory to see when you were angry what the basic problem was? Because it's sometimes different, but you got to know you. How many of you have thought somebody was saying something that was a slight to you, but you were so sensitive that they had no intention of aiming it at you, but you carried it for days? Or some meth addicts. Shit, we had them all over, didn't we? We were peeking out the blinds when... Anyway. That's a whole other subject. Okay. Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Did they not receive my kindness to my satisfaction? So is that their fault? No, and it's not my fault either, but I'm suffering it because of my expectation, not their reception. Does it make sense? It better be true, otherwise I'm going to be trapped in it forever. Okay. Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well? Have you ever been victimized by that delusion? Did you know it was a delusion? Do you know the nature of delusion? The nature of delusion is I lie to me and I don't know I'm lying. So if you're telling people you're delusional, you may be, but you're lying right now. Because delusional people don't know they're delusional. You know the evidence of delusion is how many of you thought you were covering up your addiction well enough that you were pulling it off? And then when you finally admitted it, did you make it unanimous? That would be an example of delusion. Okay. All right, so is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants, and do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? So I can't tell you what that's like for you, but what happened for me, what I discovered as a result of this process, is I always wanted everything set up just perfect, and then the lights would pan to me to play the show that was my life, and the show could not come off because I was out arranging the lights, the scenery, and the ballet. So I was not there to play the part that was my life, therefore the play I was arranging could not possibly come off because I didn't play my part. Anyone ever have such a discovery? You might if you do it. You never know. So it says our actor is self-centered, egocentric as people like to call it nowadays. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity. When they put a question mark, they want me to go inward. Am I really that bothered by that? Or is this something going on in my thought life that's personalizing something that really isn't affecting me? Any of you got yourself in a complete spin over something that really didn't have a damn thing to do with what was really happening? I'm the only son bitch ever did that. Oh, all right. So selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on self which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So please understand, I know people come to recovery and they've been gravely harmed, they've been treated bad as children, been treated bad as adults. We're not suggesting, nor are they, that you had anything to do with that bad treatment. What we are saying is, number one, the book's written in past tense, so these guys have already had an awakening as the result of the steps. They've found the purpose in their suffering, and now that they have purpose in their suffering, it's no longer suffering, it's purpose. Does that make sense? So, even if you had nothing to do with harms you've experienced, your unforgiveness is causing you to suffer, not the person who harmed you, and the healing you need is going to only come to you when you offer to another witness of the power that restored you or carried you through it. When you offer yourself as an instrument of grace to somebody else going through a difficult situation and let them know that there is power that is carrying them through it, and you've been sent to them to walk and carry that burden with them, you'll get the healing you need as you offer it to them. Does that make sense to you? It should all make sense. Just logic. We always get access to more power than we need when we offer it to another. If I'm trying to hold it all to me, I'm only going to get what I need. Okay. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So people, they're just regular examples of self-will run riot, and I have determined I'm alcoholic. I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, and I don't think so. What's the chances I can live happily in the world? If I'm honest, zero, right? Probably not going to live long, but I'm probably going to live longer than I want to. Any of you get that far in your addiction? Okay. All right. So it says, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. Now they're talking again. Have you ever been in those rooms where they said, I wish those people out there get a program like we got in here? You ever heard that? And I'm sitting there going, I wish the people in here get a program like we got in this book. Because I'm not troubled by the world as long as I do what these people suggest. And I can't be useful to other people as long as I'm condemning. You don't get to be, how many of you have made it to a court trial on the way here? You notice how there was a prosecutor and then there was a defense? You notice how they did not switch seats? We do not get to be on both sides. If you want to claim grace, you need to be an instrument of grace. What right do I have to judge anybody or anything given my history? I don't know what your history is, but when we meet here, we all have history. Yeah? Okay. So, since we muster, it kills us. God makes that possible. There often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. So you notice how they said that 3 times, 3 different ways? Now they're telling you the difficulty in growing in consciousness. How many of you turned your addiction over to God but thought you had the rest of it just fine? So there's always a growing awareness that there's one creator and one creation, and we are part of that oneness. And so for me to find fault with some other part of the oneness is only describing my thought and not necessarily a reality. Does that make sense? Okay, but we could, many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. So any of you have had that happen to you? Desperately wanted to be a better version of you, but just couldn't quite summon the... Okay. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. Have you ever tried to make yourself absent yourself in your thought life and tested their theory? It's impossible. If I'm aware of self, I can't be absent self. How many of you working with someone else had stuff flowing through you, although flowing through you, you knew was not of you? There was no thought or action or effort on your part. It was just going out to whoever you were trying to help. Have you ever had that experience? And then we know. Does that make sense? Now I'm absent self. The minute I become aware I'm an instrument, I'm no longer absent self. Okay. All right. So that's why we need the power to do it. Do you understand what I'm saying? The reason we do it, just logically, I need a power greater than me, because as soon as I'm aware of myself, then self's back. Okay. So this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. So for those people that didn't believe in God, that's disturbing to realize we were playing God. But the point is, they're talking about tangible power. They're not talking about a theological creation. They're talking about the Creator. So you have to kind of, if I'm disagreement with what is, I'm playing God. Does that make sense? Any of you found yourself in just an intolerable situation, no faults, just something bad going, someone you cared about deeply dying in your life, and you didn't want it to happen, and it was going to happen, and you had to go through the experience of powerlessness. So the fact of the matter is, that's a human experience. It's a real experience of powerlessness, but I have to get on board with what is and be a comfort to those who are around me, because that's my job. And unless I'm playing that role, I'm always going to suffer. Does it make sense? Okay. So then it said it didn't work. Next we decided that here and after in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. So I'll let the director direct, and that take you back to Scripture, be still and know. When called upon, the witness will come naturally. Any of you ever had that experience? You stand by, and sometimes you die and just scream something out. Any of you ever had that happen? You ever stay quiet long enough that someone else said something and you didn't have to catch the crap for it? God, this is a tough crowd, Jay. He's the principal, we're his agents, he's the father, and we're his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone in the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. What concept? God's in charge. Whatever's going on is God's will. Grow up, Joe. You have painted the moment with your perspective. From another teaching, how can you see the speck in your brother's eye when you can't see the plank in your own eye? Better, you should remove the plank from your eye so you better see to help your brother. Any person, place, or thing, or institution that I'm suffering as a result of my perception of it, I need my perception to change before I can be a change agent. You cannot change anyone by condemning them. Have you ever had anyone condemning you? Where's my alumni? You've had the experience of people condemning you, trying to change you. Were you resistant? Everyone is. Everyone is. We're not here to condemn. We're not here to judge. We're here to love. Okay. So, What did I do?
Top of 63.
Okay. When we sincerely took such a position, so what is the position I've taken? God's in charge, and I'm gonna try and get to know God better, right? That's what the process I've encountered power into. You can call that power anything you want. They're gonna call it God because of its sensory nature, right? So we can agree. All sorts of remarkable things followed. Where's anyone here from Christian tradition? Does it sound reasonable to you that once you have sincerely taken the position of turning your will and your life over to the care of God, signs and wonders will follow you? Does it sound correct? Okay. We had a new employer, being all-powerful. He provided what we needed and kept close to Him. If we kept close to Him and performed His work well, how does one stay close to God? Now that I know it's an experience, the Holy Spirit in me, it's not hard to stay close to God. I just got to stay awake. Does it make sense? We're not fighting a battle. The battle's won. We're walking in victory. We're not trying to win one. Does it make sense? Do you ever wonder about that? How many of you just don't pick up no matter what? I don't have a picture of don't pick up no matter what. I've got a picture of pick up no matter what. It takes no power to don't pick up. Anyone know what I'm talking about? I don't need power to not pick up. I need the power of purpose so I have the power to live and want to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So then, established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and design. How many of you have been at this long enough to realize that there is a bigger plan in play? Okay. So more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. So how many of you are taking on commitments, helping out other people, doing some stuff like that? So we're starting to contribute to life rather than take, yes? Have you found there's always plenty even when you're helping other people? As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, CMA meeting, where's my meth addicts, crack addicts, anyone with peace of mind is a rare commodity for us on stimulants, yes? Think of what they're saying. Enjoy peace of mind and absence of conflict in my thought life. And they said power flowing in, not dripping or trickling. How many of you have felt such a flow? If you've gone through the step experience, you should have. You should have felt some of it tonight. Okay, as we discovered we could face life successfully. You know how people discover they could face life successfully? They do an inventory, they find out the harms they've done, and they start prosecuting their amends. And in doing that, they generally, if you're like me, you go get a shitty little job and you start paying out more money than you got, but somehow you always have enough. And one day, all that shit that was impossible is all done through the power. The circumstance didn't go away. I was changed through the circumstance. Does that make sense? Okay. It says, as we became conscious of His presence. So they're promising that. Consciousness is the awareness of being aware. I'm not talking to you about somebody else's idea of God. Do not define God or you will confine God. Experience God. Bear witness to the power to others. And you will find a unique purpose for your life. Even the parts that you didn't really want to discuss in the beginning. And then it talks about some more promises. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. So what are they promising? A gradual death of self. It doesn't happen right away. It doesn't probably happen in this lifetime. But what is the book of James says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you participate in sufferings of any kind. For you are participating in the sufferings of Christ. That sound familiar to anyone? I know I misquoted it. Sorry I don't quote Scripture adequately, but I always tell my more religious groups when I get to talk to them, although I can't quote the Scripture, I am a friend of the author. So we are now at step 3. Notice how they knew they were talking to alcoholics or addicts. Didn't they say we were at step 3 like 2.5 pages ago? Yeah. And then they, yeah, step 3, hurry up. Anyway, And then they went through and let us find ourselves. Yes? And now they say, okay, now we're ready. Yeah? So did you guys catch what the step 3 decision is? All I'm asking for is power to go inward. Please join me in this inward search that I may find your reality in me. That I may find purpose in my suffering so that I can be an instrument of your peace in the world. Simple. You don't have to say their prayer, say any prayer. God already knows how you talk. God doesn't care whether you believe in Him, He believes in you. I know that because you're here. Okay. And if you're hearing me talk, I always like to point out too that it may be bad news if you meet me on a 12-step call, because God does not send me out to treat hangnails. Might be a little more serious than you thought. So we're now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood Him, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Do you notice how they didn't tell me that me declaring victory over my obstacles was what I needed to do? Through the power of God, as I overcome those obstacles and other people watch me do it. So works are observable by others. That's why faith without works is dead. I find life and purpose in demonstrating for others, not by talking, but by walking. Dr. Bob said, carry this message to other alcoholics and if necessary, talk. He worked with 5,000 people in the 15 years of life he had remaining years. Okay. So it says, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. So why would I have to think well about saying a prayer? Because God doesn't care about prayers I don't care about. So if I don't know what I'm asking for and what I'm intending to do, probably not going to happen for me. Any of you ever had that experience? I was stumbling in the fellowship for years and years and years. And I kept coming back just tore up. And these people would say, Joe, why don't you just turn it over? I said, well, I thought I turned it over. How do you turn it over? Let's say the prayer. Turn it over. You ever had anyone say that shit to you? I said, man, I said that fucking prayer. When I'm high, man, you know. Because it wasn't about the prayer. It was about the intent. Does that make sense? It was about empowering me through the power, my belief in the great reality because of the demonstration of that encounter I'd had. Does that make sense? Okay. It says we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. But it's better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. Those of you who know biblical teaching, you know, we don't yoke ourselves to unbelievers because it'll dampen the effect. You guys, again, I'm not going to try and cite, and if you're not from that, all we're trying to say is there is power in our knowing one another in the Spirit. Spirit recognizes Spirit. So the minute I'm in a room with one of you people who has been introduced to this power, within 3 words of a conversation, we're going to feel each other. Does that make sense? Regardless of theology, we're going to feel each other. Okay? You got to know that, or I'm not going to have the depth and weight to reach the insane. Does that make sense? Because it's not my power that reaches them, it's His power that reaches them. And He calls people out of graves. Called me out of mine. Anyone else know about it? That's a dead man walking. Okay. The wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we express the idea, voicing without reservation. If you do not like religious type stuff, say your own prayer. Write your own. It's so simple. I can't. Will you help me? Show yourself to me. Empower me. All I'm asking for is the power to do the inventory. I'm not even going to say an amen here. It's not over at 3. All I'm asking for is give me the power to look honestly within me and find out what I was like, what happened, what I'd like to be now. And then, once I've reviewed it with somebody else, then I'll do a 6th and 7th. You know, take all of me, good and bad, and take away everything that stands in the way of my usefulness, and then it'll say amen. God never asked me to do that blind. He opened my eyes, but I had to participate. That's what 4 and 5 are about. Does that make sense? This was only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect Sometimes a very great one was felt at once. If you've never had such an experience, my suggestion to you, if you would like to, go to your quiet place in your room, look yourself in the mirror, do whatever, and say that prayer honestly. Take me through the process and reveal yourself to me. Make my life purposeful. Do whatever you, I don't care what you do, as long as it's sincerely made, an effect will be felt at once. And I've had people I've told this to. One guy had been in AA for 10 years, bouncing in and out, never done a 4-step. And so I sat down and I went through this very section that I just went through with you tonight. And then when I was done, he said, I'm ready, I'm ready. I said, no. You've been doing this for 10 years. I'd like for you to go to a quiet place, see what kind of effect, and I want you to call me and tell me what that effect was, and then we'll proceed if it seems indicated. So later that night, I get this call. He says, I said that prayer and I didn't feel nothing. But my inventory is done and I'd like to discuss it tomorrow. I said, wow, 10 years in AA, you never did an inventory, and now you have one tonight? Some people might call that an effect. And that's where I'm leaving you. Thanks so much.